Hello students, welcome to Exam Companion. Today we will cover Part 2 of History Chapter 2 for Class 7 students. We have already covered topics until the Chola Empire in Part 1. If you haven't seen that video, then you can visit the link on the top of your screens right now. In Part 2, we will cover the explanation of pages 22 to 27 of NCERT. The topics that we will study are Introduction from Uraiyur to Thanjavur, Splendid temples and bronze sculptures, agriculture and irrigation, and the administration of the empire. All these topics are related to the Chola Empire. Now, like the map that we saw in part 1, this map is also very important and it's very easy to understand as well. Now, let's have a look at this map. So, for now, you just have to remember 5 names from this map and then we will be good to go. So let's see. The first name that you have to remember is Thanjavur. Look inside the circle. The next one is Uraiyur. The third one is Kaveriyar, which means Kaveri River, just above Thanjavur. The fourth name is Pandyas, which is at the bottom of your screens right now, written in capital letters. And the final name is Kanchi, which is at the top of your mini screen. Kanchi was also called Kanchipuram. Uraiyur, Thanjavur, Kaveri River, Kanchi and Pandyas. These are 5 very important names that are relevant for the Cholas. So now let's see how the Cholas became powerful. The Cholas became powerful in mid-9th century and remained a very powerful kingdom for almost 4 centuries. The story starts in Kanchi or Kanchipuram. Kanchi was the capital of Pallava dynasty. And there was a conflict between Pallava and Pandya dynasty. So, the Cholas took advantage of this conflict. But how? Now, Uraiyur was a subordinate or was understudy of the Pallava kings. And they controlled Kaveri Delta region for Pallavas. So, in the middle 9th century, Vijayalaya, who was a Chola, he conquered Kaveri Delta region from Uraiyur. And he built a town called Thanjavur and also built a temple of Devi Nishumbhasudini there. Now, Kaveri Delta was very important for the Cholas. Why? Pay attention. As you saw in part 1, how Kannauj was so important because it was close to Ganga river. Similarly, Kaveri Delta had fertile land. That is why it was very important. After all this, Cholas grew in power and successors of Vijayalaya conquered regions of Pandya and Pallava dynasty and made them a part of their kingdom. Now, after Vijayalaya, many Chola kings expanded their kingdom and conquered many parts of other kingdoms. But among all these great kings, Rajaraja I or Rajaraja the Great is considered to be the most powerful Chola ruler. He became king in 985 CE and expanded control over regions of Pandya and Pallava dynasties. His son Rajendra Chola I continued his policies and expanded the kingdom even further. He raided the Ganga Valley. He also raided Sri Lanka and other islands, and he developed a very strong navy for these. Now, Rajendra Chola I and Rajaraja Chola I were 2 of the most powerful Chola kings. Now, one thing that you must remember is that Cholas were not only warriors, but they were able administrators. They had love for art and architecture, and they also improved agriculture and irrigation methods. Let's see how the Chola rule influenced the art and architecture of the country. Cholas built many beautiful temples across their kingdom. 2 of these amazing temples were built by Rajaraja I and Rajendra Chola I. Rajaraja built a splendid temple at Thanjavur and Rajendra Chola built a temple at Kangaikonda Cholapuram. Students, one point that you must remember is that during this period, temples were not only for worship. Instead, they were a center, they were a hub of craft production, and a lot of people used to live around the temples. Now, a question may arise. Who used to grant such big portions of land for the temple? So as you already know, rulers used to grant land for the temples. Also, the produce of this land, for example, crops, fruits, etc., were sold, and that money was used for the people who worked at the temple, such as priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, and so on. Temples were not only a place of worship, they were hub of economic, social, and cultural life as well. Economic because, as you just saw, the produce was sold and that money was used for people who worked at temple. So it's kind of creating jobs. Social and cultural because we discussed human societies used to settle around the temples. As you know, temples were centers of craft production. The most popular craft at that time was making of bronze images. These bronze images were considered the finest in the world, and most of those images were of deities, kings, and sometimes of devotees as well. Here you can see the bronze image of Nataraj, who is the lord of dance, and Rajaraja, the great Chola king. Now, one of the major achievements of the Chola Empire was development in irrigation and agriculture methods. This is the same map that we saw earlier. Now you can see the Kaveri Delta here. I have also encircled the region. We discussed earlier that Kaveri was very important for the Cholas. How? When a river overflows, it deposits fine sand and minerals on its banks, thus forming fertile plains. Also, the river provides water and moisture that is necessary for crops, especially rice. We have covered this topic in detail in Chapter 3 of Geography. You can see that video by visiting the link on the top of your screens. So now you must be wondering that Kaveri River was present naturally. So what was the contribution of Cholas then? How did they improve agriculture and irrigation? So under the Cholas, people started growing crops on a larger scale. Now if you are growing more crops, then you need more land. Hence, forests had to be cleared. Also, the land was uneven at some places, so the land had to be leveled. Embankments had to be made. Now we just discussed that how a fertile land is formed when a river overflows. That's true if water is in limited amount. But if there is too much water, then that area can get flooded and the flood can destroy crops and homes. So embankments are walls that are made near a river to prevent flooding of an area. And finally, canals had to be made. Canals were used in irrigation to provide water. Talking of irrigation, when crop production grew, it became more important to water the crops artificially as well. Farmers could no longer depend on rain alone. So, wells were dug, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater, and sluice gates were constructed. A sluice gate is a gate that is used to control flow of water. It helps in releasing the right amount of water from rivers and canals. Now, as you have seen that there were so many activities going on in the Chola Empire. Temples were being constructed, bronze images were being made, irrigation and agricultural methods were also being improved. So there must be some people who were managing and controlling all these activities because the king can't do all these things alone. So rich peasants and Brahmins helped in administration. Let's see how. Farmers or peasant groups were called Ur. With the spread of irrigation and agriculture, these groups became rich. There were many such groups called Ur in a village. These groups called Ur formed larger groups or they formed larger units called Nadu. Now, what did Nadu do? Nadus used to collect taxes and deliver justice. Now, there must be someone who controlled Nadu, right? Because there were hundreds of peasants in a Nadu, right? So, rich peasants of Velela caste were the ones who controlled Nadu, and they used to do it under the supervision of the Chola king. A quick recap. With the spread of irrigation and agriculture, peasant groups called Ur became rich. Many Ur groups together formed larger groups called Nadu. Nadu used to collect taxes and deliver justice. The Nadu groups were controlled by some rich peasants of Velala caste, who worked under the supervision of the Chola king. Ur, Nadu, rich Velala peasants, and the Chola kings. That's the order. We will discuss some important terms that may come in your exam. Vandavelan, a peasant serving 3 kings. Uraiyur means chief. And Brahmadeya means land gifted to Brahmins. Brahma means Brahman, Deya means land which was gifted to them. So each Brahmadeya was looked after by a Sabha of prominent Brahman landholders. So the members of the Sabha looked after Brahmadeya, and they also looked after irrigation work, gardens and temples. So like Nadu used to collect taxes and deliver justice, this Sabha used to look after Brahmadeya, irrigation work, gardens and temples. Now remember how the rich peasants of Velala caste controlled Nadu? But here there were some rules to become a Sabha member. You cannot be just rich and be of certain caste, but you had to follow some rules to become a Sabha member. All those who wished to become members of the Sabha should be owners of land from which revenue is collected. They should have their own homes. They shouldn't be homeless. They should be between 35 and 70 years of age. That is neither too young nor too old. They should be experienced in administrative matters and be honest. They should have knowledge of Vedas. That is, they should be educated. If anyone has been a member of any committee in the last 3 years, then he cannot be a member of another committee. So there were many committees. Say, if a person was a member of committee A, then he cannot be a member of committee B for 3 years. Also, the last one, anyone who has not submitted his accounts as well as those of his relatives cannot contest the elections. So everyone has to give records of their earnings. All these rules show that only rich, honest, educated and powerful people could be a part of the Sabha. Whereas there was a Tang dynasty in China where people were appointed through an exam and anyone could appear for that exam. See the contrast here. There anyone could appear for the exam, and if he or she passed the exam, then they could have a higher post, whereas here only rich, honest, educated and powerful people could be a part of the Sabha. Now this is also a question in your NCERT back exercise, so please memorize it. It's very easy. So with that, we have completed the chapter 2 of history. Share your thoughts and queries in the comment section and hit that like button if you like the video. I'll see you in the next video.